Hi, my name is Willis. Today I'm going to talk about West African art and architecture. Agenda. Today we're going to go over West African art in Europe, West African architecture, and their influences on today. Historical background of West African art. Traditional art served many functions. They satisfied everyday needs and they were used in rituals and ceremonies. Over here is an image of a handmade cloth. And this is a handmade basket. They were both used in everyday lives. At the bottom, it is a statue of a saint and a mask of a dog. They are used in rituals and ceremonies in West Africa. West African sculptures. Nok culture, 500 BCE to 200 CE. They made terracotta sculptures of humans. The sculptures has long narrow heads, unusual hairstyles, and dramatic expressions. Some believe that represented ancestors or mythical figures. Over here is a sculpture from the Nok culture. You can really see the long narrow heads, unusual hairstyles, and dramatic expressions in this sculpture. The Yoruba people of Ife. They also made terracotta sculptures, but they later used bronze and copper. They also made sculptures of royalty in the 11th century. Over here is a sculpture from the Yoruba people, and it is made of bronze and copper. The Benin people, founded in 1100 CE. They learned how to sculpt from the Yorubas, and they used their sculptures to honor the royal court. They also made plaques to show the king's power, as shown on the right over here. West African masks. West African wooden masks. They were worn in ceremonies, performance, and sacred rites. They are believed to bring the spirits of gods and ancestors to the present. And on the right is an example of what they might wear in the ceremony. West African textiles. West African stamped fabric. They stamp on grid fabric with patterns. The stamps represent proverbs, historical figures, objects, plants, or animals. On the right is a picture of a stamped fabric, and the stamps represent teeth, or tooth. West African story fabric. They depict events, for example, king hunting lions. And they make the story fabric by attaching small pieces of fabric to a larger background piece, and that is called applique. On the right is a very complex and beautiful image of a story fabric. West African kente cloth. People make kente cloth by sewing narrow strips of fabric together. It reflects on the artist's life, family history, values, beliefs, or social circumstances. For example, if you're poor, then you might use cheaper fabric, but if you're really rich, you might use more expensive fabrics. So on the right is an example of kente cloth. West African design of everyday objects. Design of everyday objects. They design and decorate everyday objects such as symmetric storage containers, utensils, furniture, and baskets. On the right is a bunch of handmade baskets that are finely decorated. West African art in Europe. West African art in Europe. They influenced avant-garde artists in the 1900s. French artists knew nothing about the sculptures, but they recognized the spirit instantly when they saw them. The French artists blended African sculpture with post-impressionism, and results helped to define early modernism. German expressionists conflated dissonant colors and figural distortion to depict the anxieties of modern life. Sculptures were cheap and treated as artifacts of colonized sculptors in Europe. Influences of West African art in Europe. West African sculptures. Modernist artists were drawn to West African sculpture because of its sophisticated approach to the abstraction of the human figure. On the right, it is a West African sculpture, and as you can see, they took a more abstract approach than naturalistic. Portrait of Gertrude Stein by Pablo Picasso. Picasso finalized Gertrude Stein's face after in the mask-like style of archaic sculpture. On the right over here is the portrait of Gertrude Stein, and as you can see, her face is kind of drawn in a frozen style, like a mask. And the reason Picasso did that is because he was inspired by West African sculptures, and he decided that he was going to adopt it and then use it in his own drawings. The Young Sailor 2 by Henri Matisse. Matisse replaced the first version of the young sailor's naturalistically contoured facial features with an abstract visage. Over here is the first version of the young sailor, and on the right is the second version. As you can see, the first version is more natural, and that is what the young sailor might have looked like in real life. But the second version took a more abstract approach, and that is all because of the inspiration of West African sculptures. Woman's Head by Amedeo Modigliani. Modigliani adopted the distinctive West African facial styles in a series of sculptures she made. On the right, it is a sculpture she made called Woman's Head, and you can really see the West African influence in the long heads and dramatic expressions. West African architecture. West African nomads, or hunter-gatherers. Due to their hunting and gathering, they move frequently. They built light-frame shelters made of mostly grass, branches, etc. On the right, here is a shelter of a West African nomad. And as you can see, it is covered with a lot of grass and the inside is made of branches. West African pastoral nomad. They follow defined routes and they use the traditional Bedouin tent made of animal skins and poles. On the right, here is an image of the traditional Bedouin tent that West African pastoral nomads lived in. Savannas and semi-deserts. People who lived in savannas and semi-deserts built cylindrical houses, as shown as the image on the right. They were constructed of mud in the coil pottery technique, since there are no wood and other materials available. But the thing is, they are no longer made today. West African compounds. Most compounds are low-domed and circular. The floor and walls are all plastered and dried. They are also decorated with colored clay and motifs. The pens and compounds are built together as shown in the picture over here. West African forest dwellings. People who lived in the forest built rectangular plant houses. They make them using pole frames with mud infilling. They decorate their houses with mud molded over grass armature and fluid motifs. And over here is an image of forest dwellings. Coast of Western Africa. People who lived by the coast constructed houses of mangrove poles or bamboo. They often have male and female ancestor figures standing by the doors. And on the right, here is an example of male and female ancestors standing by a house near the coast of Western Africa. Influences of Islam. Influences of Islam in West Africa. They started to build mosques in the 11th century. People also started to build houses that are rectangular, flat-roofed, and at least 2 stories in height. They also decorated with Islam calligraphy instead. And on the right over here is an example of a mosque in Western Africa. Summary. West African art included sculptures, masks, textiles, and design of everyday objects. It inspired various artists including Picasso. It also influenced fashion around the world. West African architecture. They built tents, huts, compounds, etc. They are made mostly of wood, grass, and mud. Their architecture is influenced by Islam. Thank you for watching.